Welcome to the Rest is Politics US. I'm Anthony Scaramucci. I am joined today by Stuart Stevens, a dear friend of mine, a veteran Republican strategist, and was the chief strategist on the Romney campaign in 2012, among so many other things that he's done. He's also a best-selling author, and he's a co-founder of the Lincoln Project. And so we made this, Stuart, Lincoln Project Week. I had Rick Wilson on earlier. Caddy's away. God bless her, on vacation. It's always great to talk to you. Great to see you. We have something called the Don Road Doctrine or the Trump Doctrine. But I also have a doctrine where it's Trump needs a doctor doctrine. Okay, just hear me out for a second, okay? He's giving the middle finger to an assembly worker at a Ford plant in Dearborn, Michigan. He now wants to do a Mondani or Elizabeth Warren or a Bernie Sanders approach to the credit card and banks, where he's going to cap interest rates at 10%. We talk about the ramifications of that. And he's threatening countries, but also territories like Greenland, who are controlled by Denmark. So I want to start there, Stuart, and I want you to manifest your best psychiatry, if you can, and tell us what you think is actually really going on. Is there just madness to the madness, or is there method to the madness?
Well, I think if you kind of step back, there is no conservative party in America today. So normally a party, any president will represent a party that has some ideological, philosophical approach to government that, and they have differences. But you ask Elizabeth Warren, her theory of government, she can articulate one. You might think she's crazy. You can argue with her. She's very good at it. No one can do that on the conservative side now. And I think that what this is a series, Donald Trump is going increasingly weaker, which gets into your doctor stuff in all sense. He's weaker. If he was, 45 years old and, winning the Masters Olympics, he still would be getting weaker politically because he's a lame duck president. And all lame duck presidents are weaker than they were. It's just a fact of life. But when you combine it with his physical decline and his mental decline, and when you combine it with this image that is so important to MAGA of sort of masculinity, the guy, all these absurd memes of him out there as Superman or whatever, it's particularly damaging to him. So what does somebody like that do? You know better than anybody, Anthony. He tries to reassert, no, this isn't happening. So why not take out a head of state of a foreign country? Greenland. We could invade Greenland. We could win that war, I bet. And it's just sort of a floundering around. And, what struck me most about the whole Venezuela thing, Anthony, is they couldn't come up with a consistent answer as to why they did it. So when Vance went out there, he said, it's all about, we have an indicted drug dealer in a palace in Caracas, and we can't allow that to happen. Like it was some episode of The Wire. Okay. Like you could argue that. Marco Rubio said we can't have foreign influences in a hemisphere, like it was a game of Risk. And Trump went out and talked about it like it was a hostile board takeover. We've gotten rid of those board members, and now we run Venezuela. And it just seems like on a base level, removing a head of state is not an unserious thing that they would have gone to the trouble to come up with a consistent reason for it.
I see the lame duck stuff, and I see the overreaction to the lame duck stuff, because there are still some honest brokers in the room. They won't be publicly honest brokers, but I could imagine somebody like Susie Wiles. You and I know her a long time. They're talking about the midterms and the concern that if they lose the House, he could be under investigation. Also, someone could say to him, and he could overreact to this, well, this is your last real election where you're going to be a force of nature in the election. After this, you're going to be politically irrelevant in the United States. And I would imagine something like that to Donald Trump would drive him crazy. Right. But this thing in the Ford factory, Stuart, I want you to react to it for a second, because this to me is like, he's for the worker, but he's flipping the bird to the workers. And I reported on this program prior to Christmas at the invitation of the Ford Motor Company. Ironically, I went to that factory. That's the Rouge plant out in Dearborn, Michigan, the famous Henry Ford plant, now making Ford F-150s. And as I've said on the program, they're producing one truck, the best-selling truck in America, one truck every 53 seconds. And I stood on that ledge where the president was with the manager of the Ford plant. And the notion, even if they were, whatever they were saying to him, I could think they called him a pedophile protector or something like that. Obviously, there's people down there don't like him. But the president of the United States, to flip the middle finger to a group of workers. Okay, and forget about, I get it. We don't see him as the president of the United States as much as we see him as Donald Trump. But I just want you to react to the political symbolism of that. And is there any political symbolism of that? Or can Donald Trump more or less do whatever he wants, and even that middle finger is on brand?
I don't think there's anything that is attractive about President of the United States flipping the bird to workers of any kind. And there's such symbolism in that plant, that really, right at the heart of the arsenal of democracy in World War II. And, doesn't it just speak to this lack of self-restraint he has, this inability to control his impulses? Being president, you should get a lot of criticism. You should get booed. You should get jeered. I mean, that just goes with the territory. I mean, it would be like a sports figure going into the stands after a heckling fan. And when that happens, we don't think that's a good thing for the sports figure. It's like, dude, you're going to get fined. Settle down. This isn't a good look. And it just speaks to weakness. That you let it get to you. And probably, I haven't seen any reporting on the person who did it. But, that's a reference to the Epstein stuff, obviously. And that is a huge deal with his own base. So, that could have been from some, progressive left-wing type. More likely it's not. More likely somebody who listened to a lot of...
It could have been a MAGA person. Exactly right. It could have been a MAGA person like a Marjorie Taylor Greene. Is like, you said you were giving us the Epstein files, and now you're not doing that. But also, again, if it's madness, I accept that. But there's also a distraction at play here as well that I want you to react to. The method to the madness could be, hey, I got to get this Epstein file as far off of the canvas of all mainstream media, non-mainstream media, social media. And so if I snatch Maduro, I saber rattle at Greenland, I threaten Iran during a protest movement in Iran, this will take the noise out of the direction of Epstein. What do you say about that?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's a classic historical trend of presidents who are at home having trouble domestically for whatever reasons, try to focus on foreign policy. Because foreign policy, they can control more. And when you send in Delta Force to Venezuela, you don't have to deal with any other Americans who think this may not be a good idea. You can just do it. This was a classic tactic of Nixon's. And George Bush, to a certain degree, did, the first George Bush, this. So, I think that what I step back here and, here we are in January before midterms. In politics, as you know better than anybody, Anthony, you need a good messenger or you need a good message. And if you can have both, you're probably going to have a really good day on election day. For the life of me, as somebody who worked in the party 30 years or so, I don't know what the message is of the party that is attracting voters that they don't already have. And ultimately, as our friend Haley Barber, used to always say, politics is about addition, not subtraction. And who are the messengers? Trump, the combined favorables of Trump and J.D. Vance at this moment are lower than the current favorability of Vice President Harris. That's sort of funny, if nothing else. You have J.D. Vance, who's uniquely unattractive, who seems to take it to go out. I'll defend when nobody else will defend, in a way no one else will defend it. And that's going to help me rise in this shadow primary. Stephen Miller? Is there a more unattractive sort of ghoulish figure in America? Kristi Noem? I was there in South Dakota working for the governor of South Dakota, Bill Janklow, when she was crowned Miss Snow Queen. And I don't think it's, we all sat there and go, there's a future Homeland Security director right there on stage.
Yeah, Jailhouse Barbie. I call her Jailhouse Barbie, Stu. So I think the assembly line thing is a pivot moment for me. And I'll just hear me out for a second. I think Trump has basically said, hey, I'm in full nihilism mode now. I'm going to do whatever I want, whenever I want to do it, give people the finger. They could be part of my base or not. Send Rubio and Vance to Greenland or to meet with the Danish officials, talk about buying Greenland or whatever the hell they're talking about over there. He's coming to the World Economic Forum. I'm here in Switzerland right now. I'll be at the WEF next week. Caddy will be joining me there. He'll be at the World Economic Forum with those European leaders who all he has done for the last 13 months is castigated them. And I imagine that there'll be more than sedentary stuff coming out of his mouth. So to me, I just think it's a pivot point of nihilism. I want to point out to people that this gentleman, T.J. Sabula, 40 years old, Stuart, United Auto worker, local 600 line worker. He's raised, and again, he didn't do this himself. A couple of guys got together. They went on GoFundMe. And they said, okay, he's been suspended by the Ford Motor Company. It's not clear when he'll be able to return back to work due to his actions. 2 different GoFundMe pages, Stuart. They raised a combined total of $810,765. Okay, he has now asked, this is his request, could the donation stop? Okay, now he's making probably $60 or $70 an hour. It's not a bad job. It's north of $100,000 a year if you put in all of the benefits. But he just received probably 7 or 8 times his salary from the American people in support of this slur that he launched at the president. Of course, in my opinion, he is a pedophile protector. The president would deny that, of course. But I've given you my opinion. I share the same opinion as the Ford factory worker. So what do you say about that? The response from Americans sending $15, $20, $100, $1,000 donations to this young man?
Yeah, I think that one of the great mysteries of Trump is there's no part of American life in which any teacher, coach, Boy Scout leader, Girl Scout leader, CEO, Midwest manager would encourage or tolerate the behavior of Donald Trump. There's not a board in America, even before he was a convicted felon, that would have appointed him. And it's always baffled me, like, why is it that if you as a coach wouldn't think of doing what Donald Trump does? Why is it that you support Donald Trump? Because, if you go back to when, Bill Clinton and all the Monica Lewinsky stuff, so many people like Bill Bennett wrote beautifully about how the office of the White House is more than just an executive. It embodies something in America. And I can tell you, Anthony, I was working in the Bush campaign, and we made a lot of commercials, spent a lot of money, but really the only thing, certainly the thing that worked better than anything else was George Bush looking into the camera and promising to restore honor and dignity to the White House. And that, I think, won the election for him. I think, America's sort of sense of the unsavory, if nothing else, quality of that whole thing. And you look back on that and it seems like so small time stuff. And I think that America is still there. And I think it's a real tragedy that Republicans aren't speaking up and defending it more. It shouldn't be a partisan issue.
Stuart, to my theory, and again, I just want to add a little bit of evidence, I think, to this theory. I'm going to put a 10% cap. He's not even allowed to do it, by the way. That's a congressional thing that would have to happen. It would have to go through all of the different regulatory bodies inside the Senate Banking Committee, et cetera. But, this is a hard left populist thing to do. And I'm going to do this because, I'm texting back and forth with Mayor Mondani, and affordability is going to be a big thing coming in the next midterm election. And so, again, this is part of his nihilism. No problem. I'm just going to fire this in there. What say you about that?
I find it darkly hysterical that the Republican Party is losing its mind over Mayor of New York who's talking about maybe 5 city-run groceries. And we're nationalizing Intel. Like, really, guys? And we're going to put a cap on interest rates. Really? Bernie Sanders, I'm not sure he would do that.
Your socialism is not as good as our socialism, right, Stuart?
Exactly. I mean, it's like, and we basically support Putin. It's kind of a trifecta. And one way to look at the whole ICE thing, in many ways, what's happening now is what the far right predicted that the left wanted to do. This shadowy army of masked men who are going to land helicopters on apartment buildings and seize people with no accountability, a government out of control. These are the people who are going to come and take our guns. And now it's coming true, but it's coming true from the Republican Party, which I think just shows that the party, to me, never really believed in a lot of the stuff that we claim to believe, and they were just marketing slogans.
Stuart, I want to go to the Supreme Court for a second. Okay, so the Trump administration lost in the district court. They lost in the appellate court. Are you allowed to put this tax, aka a tariff, on the American people without representation? And the court said, no, this is a form of taxation, and therefore you cannot do that. The decision was supposed to come out yesterday. The court has delayed this decision. Trump is clearly worried about it. He's tweeting nonstop about it. He's also pulled back and paused some tariffs because I think he's worried that he's going to get embarrassed here by the court. The stakes are very high. It's $2+ trillion of potential income over the next 3 or 4 years. There's probably $400 billion that could potentially be rebated. Or maybe the court will split the baby and say, we'll give him emergency powers for what he did, but he can't have emergency powers going forward. I'm not exactly sure what's going to happen. So 2 questions for you. Do you have an opinion? What do you think is going to happen? And then I want to talk about whether or not this is traditional Republican philosophy. And if it isn't, will we ever get back to it? So question 1.
It really comes down probably to Kavanaugh. And, Kavanaugh is a creature of the Bush world. And I can't imagine that he's going to support this. I mean, I just go back, what if there was a far left president or a left president and he was doing this? What if Bernie Sanders was president or AOC and they were pro-tariffs? Republicans would lose their friggin' minds. But, this tariff thing, and you've known Donald Trump a long time. It's one of these ideas that he's had in his head since the 80s. And all evidence to the contrary, he hasn't budged. It's almost sort of the only philosophical consistency or ideological or economic consistency that he's had. And it's a terrible idea at a time when Scandinavian countries are backing away from trying to lower VAT and these sort of tariffs. The United States is going to rush to it. And why is it that Republicans allow this to happen? It's just baffling to me. It's a lot of trouble to get elected to the Senate or the House.
Let me give you my theory and let me get you to react to it. So you're a consultant. They go to their consultants and they say, listen, Trump's going to be off the stage in 3 years. You're going to be a permanent fixture in Washington. You love the job and the power. And of course, their fear is being primaried by the hard right. So it's better for you to be a shrinking violet now and roof, do exactly what Donald Trump wants.
I think that's a very sad way for any adult to live their life. When I wrote It Was All a Lie, one of the most impactful books that I read, I stumbled across it, was a Memoirs of Franz von Papen. Franz von Papen was the Prussian aristocrat who did probably more to usher in Hitler than any other German political figure. So he wrote his memoir in 1953. In it, you could say things had gone a little sideways. World War II, the Holocaust, it hadn't really worked out. He was still trying to justify why they supported Hitler. And his logic went, we, the Prussian ruling class, had lost touch with the working class, which is what a lot of Republicans have said. And there's a lot of truth to that, particularly the white working class. The working class was trending Bolshevik, which was true. And the only way we could stop that is by someone like Hitler who could speak to him. And there's sentences in that book that are almost verbatim repeated by Mitch McConnell in 2016. The problem is, it's just, what is the upside of that? You're going to be recorded by not long-term history, but up-close history. And, the reality is, being a member of Congress and even the U.S. Senate, it's not that great of a gig. And, these are the heirs to the legacy of the greatest generation. And nobody's asking them to go charge a machine gun nest. All they have to do is be consistent with what they ran on, what they said was a fundamental economic belief of theirs. And they can't do that. And it's just so weak and disappointing.
So, Stuart, go back 1 degree, because you mentioned something about Bernie Sanders being president, putting this forth. What if Barack Obama had given the bird to an assembly line worker? How do you think Fox News would have reacted to that? And how many times during that day would they have played it and in the ensuing weeks?
That's always a very interesting question to happen. I go back to in 2004, it was a very close election. People forget Bush didn't declare victory on election night. We had to wait until we got all the ballots in from Ohio. But what if John Kerry had said, no, I won Ohio. I am the president-elect of the United States. What would the New York Times or NBC have done? They would have taken his head off. They would have said, you've lost your mind. Shut up. You're a disgrace. What did Fox and all these people do when Trump did it? Even though we now know that they didn't believe it, they said, oh, no, that's okay. That's good. And it's just, you can't equate these two parties in that sense. And as somebody that's spent, far too much of my life pointing out flaws in the Democratic Party, you still have to give them credit for this. I think it's self-defeating. And I think it's such a tragedy to see someone like Barry Weiss chasing this at CBS. And it just sort of completely dumbs down the national dialogue.
There's $120 billion of potential rebates. It's interesting, this is the year where the consumer would probably have to absorb this. About 80% of the tariffs in the first year were absorbed by the companies. Many companies like Rolex said, not going to raise prices. 39% tariff on Switzerland, no problem. Not going to pass it through to the end user. It's cut the deficit. It has slowed down the trade deficit. If you look at the mixture of trade deficit in the United States and around the world, what's your general opinion of tariffs as a, someone that's observed presidential politics, economics over the last 3 or 4 decades?
It's a tax. And I think if you should call it a tax and then have people vote on it. I don't remember Donald Trump running on a tax increase. And it's a backdoor tax increase. I think the long-term economics of it, increasingly short-term now, are completely against the growth of America. This is something that the left used to do that now the right is used to doing, which is sort of like things are terrible in America. I don't know, man. The Dow seems to be doing okay. The S&P 500 seems to be doing okay. What other country has done better economically, Western democracy, than the United States? The United States is a beast economically. And why is it that we're trying to fix something that isn't broken? In these sort of big sweeping gestures that are, I think, completely counterproductive.
This feeds into the question that I've always been dying to ask you, which is about traditional republicanism and the cult of personality around Trump. I want to test the theory on you, and your colleague Rick Wilson pushed back hard on this theory, but let me try again with his cohort at the Lincoln Project. I sort of feel like there's a quiet republicanism out there. I think that these people still have some natural Republican tendencies. They're just afraid of Donald Trump. This is a full-on personality cult. When he leaves the stage, is it possible for some of these Republican philosophies and principles to rise again? And I'll give some evidence of this. When the tariffs were relaxed on the Argentinian beef because of his love affair with Milei, the Senate went after Vance. They never go after Trump. They'll go after Stephen Miller. They'll go after Vance. But they never criticize Trump. But Vance is not Trump. And so he became a punching bag on that day. Could there be a civil war in that party and a reclamation by the old guard? Or is that long gone, Stuart?
It's long gone.
Long gone.
Here's a fundamental question to ask. When will the Republican Party nominate a candidate who will unequivocally assert that Donald Trump lost to Joe Biden in a free and fair election. I mean, every fifth grader knows that's true. And it's unimaginable that anyone's going to be nominated by the party who will go out and say that in 28. So think about it. If that's the threshold of admittance to the party to have a future, who are you going to attract? I mean, that's, it's like to get a medical license, you have to advocate the use of leeches. Like, I don't know. I don't think that's a good idea. And people know it doesn't work. I don't think that party is savable. Sometime, Anthony, take 15, 20 minutes, go on the internet and read George Bush's acceptance speech at the 2000 Republican convention in Philadelphia. You were probably there.
Yeah. I was there.
Yeah, there you go. Written by Michael Gerson, sadly no longer with us. Beautiful man. That reads like a document of a lost civilization. All about kindness and humility and service. And that person couldn't get 5% in the Republican primary. So, this is something I think for all this stuff like how did Trump happen? Trump happens because Republicans want Trump. Nobody makes anybody vote for Donald Trump. And if you go back to the last nominating primary, you had two candidates, both of whom were former clients of mine, Chris Christie and Asa Hutchinson, who were pretty much anti-Trump. And what did they collectively get? Under 10%? And in that sense, politics is sort of a perfect marketplace. People can vote for whoever they want to.
I'm personal friends with Chris Christie. Full disclosure, I gave him money for that campaign, gave money to the PAC, etc. But I told Chris, you got to go. There's 100 million people that don't vote, Stuart. You got to go after those people and think like an entrepreneur. If you could just bring in 15 million of those people, that's what Musk was saying before Vance went out to see Musk and told him to cool out on the new party, But let me test one more theory on you, because what you're saying, I do believe. I believe there's no coming back. You and Rick Wilson, by the way, 2-0. Okay. I'd like to think it's true, but I don't. But let me test you on a few things. What about congressional primacy on taxes and trade as opposed to edict from a president? And trust me, I think Republicans would support that if there was a Democratic president. What about rules-based governance where we get away from Trump flouting the rules and the process in the society? This is something, Kavanaugh talked about this in his, when he was trying to get accepted, the confirmation speeches about the rules basis. Trump has sort of broken all of that. What about judicially enforced separation of powers? This is all conservative stuff, predictability for markets and allies. Could any of that come back? I get that, yes, we're not going to get Bush-era globalism. We're not going to get free trade absolutism. We're not going to have a neocon foreign policy dominance, although weirdly Trump is flexing like a neocon. But do you think elements like what I just described could come back? Or all of that is kaput and they'll just let the president be arbitrary and capricious with the executive orders and the way they assert power?
Well, let's kind of break that down and stress test it. So the rule of law, that means that you would have to call the current Justice Department broken. You would have to say that what's happened in the Justice Department is against all tradition and history of the Justice Department, and those responsible should be held accountable. And we should restore the Justice Department to what it was, say, under Obama, under Trump in his first term. Is any Republican going to say that? I don't think so. Because, to change this, you have to admit that what it is wrong. So you have to go out and say tariffs have failed. It was a terrible idea and we're not going to support it. And it's an abdication of responsibility that we have constitutionally. And I just don't see Republicans having the will or the courage to do that. I think it is critically important for the Democratic Party, and I can't believe these words come out of my mouth, but to start talking about an apparatus to hold those inside the Trump administration criminally liable for what they're doing. There needs to be a kind of truth and reconciliation after this, because it is so outrageous. And it's not the ICE agent that is as guilty as Stephen Miller and Kristi Noem. Democrats have to have the big picture and the guts to embrace that and try to get America back to some sense where there's two parties that both agree on the principles, this thing called the Constitution, and disagree on policy specifics.
So well said, and I really do appreciate you joining me this week. Before I let you go, going to put you on the spot if you don't mind. And this is Republican nomination sweepstakes.
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to get the Republican nomination in 2028, Stuart?
J.D. Vance. Every time an incumbent vice president has run for the nomination, when the president that person served is not running for re-election, every time that vice president has won the nomination. Now, they don't win the general election overwhelmingly, but he'll win the primary. What really is astounding to me is that knowing the history of that, J.D. Vance still thinks that it is an advantage for him to go out and defend Republicans who have Nazi chat rooms. Go out and say that a federal agent has total immunity. What's up, man? My dad was an FBI agent. He never thought that. I mean, no law. 99.9% of the law enforcement in this country, which shows incredible restraint, incredible professionalism. They don't believe that. They know law enforcement goes to jail all the time in America if you break the rules. But he thinks that helps him. He'll say and do anything. And yes, I think he'll be the nominee.
I will see. I think Trump is going to Pence Vance. That's me personally, because it's classic Shakespearean stuff. He's going to put the young man in a wood chipper if he hasn't done it already, because it's just what he does to people. You know, I mean, look at Mike Pence's political career being Trump's vice president. Maybe you're right. You know, I mean, you are certainly right historically, but I think Trump, you know, he fires people that get too much attention, and he just doesn't like anybody getting the spotlight. I see Trump saying, I hope they lose. They were nothing before me. Let's go back to the Mitt Romney walkout in 2012. They became something, and there'll be nothing after I leave, Stuart. That's the classic sociopathic narcissist.
Let me ask you a quick question. Do you think there's any chance that a member of the Trump family will run for the nomination?
In 2028, I don't think so. But certainly if one of them did, Donald Trump would put them ahead of J.D. Vance. You know, now, could Vance go to Don Jr. and say, hey, I want you to be my VP and then you're the next guy? Okay, that's possible. And that's a way to blunt what I'm saying. So Trump could then look at that and say, okay, I could support that. There's a Trump on the ticket. But we'll see. We'll see. Listen, it's always great to have you around the wheelhouse to pick your brain. I appreciate you joining us on the Rest is Politics US, and I hope I get a chance to see you soon, Stuart. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. I miss having a chance to hang out. All the best.
Yeah, me too. Thank you. Well, we just heard from my dear friend, Stuart Stevens. If you guys would like more, you can sign up for our newsletter. You go to the restlesspoliticsus.com. We're making a big push for that newsletter, so please sign up there. Caddy and I will be back together next week. We'll be coming to you from the World Economic Forum, where, of course, Donald Trump is going to be there making a major speech. The president's planning to stay there for a day and a half, so that ought to be interesting with all these European leaders. So please join us again next week. And, of course, if you want to be a founding member, I'm going to channel my Caddy K here and say go to the restlesspoliticsus.com for all of our bonus features. And, of course, we greatly appreciate you guys listening to the show. Thank you.